Okay, so we find in the Torah the following statement, and it's going to open up a discussion, I hope, that is very far-reaching, and that's the idea of free will. So we find it's mentioned several times. The one time in the Torah, it's blatantly, it's clearly talked about is in Deuteronomy, and the book of Deuteronomy is essentially Moses' last will and testament to the Jewish people. He's about to die, and he's preparing them. They're about to go into Israel. He's about to die on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and he's trying to prepare the nation for what's life going to be when they get to Israel, when he's dead, and the relationship that they have with the Almighty in the desert and the wilderness is essentially going to cease. Till then, they're drinking water out of rocks. They're having their manna being parachuted down from heaven. They have Moses, who has a direct communication link with the Almighty. That's all about to end. And he gives them the following. He says, "Behold, I am giving before you the life and the good, and the death and the evil, and you should choose life." And this is the one place in the Torah where it's explicitly mentioned that there's options. You know, you have the red pill or the blue pill, right? Or you have life and good, and you have death and bad. And you should choose life. And this is used by our sages to demonstrate that this is a mitzvah in the Torah, to make choices, and to make choices that are presented before us. And we have to choose. We're going to choose the good and the life, or the death and the evil. And we're instructed to choose life, which seems to be the right choice, right? So that's the one time in the Torah that it does mention this. But it's heavily implied throughout the rest of the Torah, obviously, because the Torah is always talking about choices that we ought to make.
It has death and evil together. I mean,
Would you read the quote again?
They're not necessarily the same.
Okay, so this is just my loose translation. But I'm just trying to find the word for it. Behold, I am giving before you, or I'm placing before you, the life and the good, the death and the evil, and then it says you should choose life. And then we find in the Talmud the following statement, which says, all is in the hands of heaven, aside from fear of heaven. Everything is in God's hands, besides for fearing God. And then we find elsewhere that everything's in heaven, besides for coughs and sniffles, which kind of is problematic, but let's hold off on that thought. But either way, we're told that everything is in the hands of heaven, besides for fear of heaven. And we know fear of heaven means choices, right? Fear of heaven is the idea of someone choosing something, or choosing to, let's say, do something or to not do something because of God. Right? If someone chooses to do something that's good, do a mitzvah, only based on the existence of God, well, then they're doing something based out of fear of heaven, right? And if someone withholds from doing something wrong because it's wrong, and because, that's the wrong thing to do, well, it's essentially a fulfillment of fear of heaven as well. Thus, the idea of everything that happens to us being in our hands and not in God's hands is once again demonstrated over here. Now, I wanted to kind of open the discussion with a callback to previous discussions that we've had over here. When we talked about the first series that we talked about over here was about God. Kind of like what is the Jewish philosophy on theology and purpose, and the philosophy that develops from establishing the idea of God. And we asked a very fundamental question. Let's assume God exists. Let's take that assumption for granted. Okay? That implies necessarily that there's some sort of purpose in life or in humanity, right? That's a clear assumption. Why? Because if God exists, clearly there's some sort of enormous intelligence that's able to create, the human brain. I was having a discussion with a optometrist or ophthalmologist, I don't know which one of the two, eye doctor, on Friday night. I said to him, why, when someone is blind, can't we just transplant some optic nerves and let them see again? All you need is just the optic nerve. So he said, essentially, theoretically, you could do that. You might have to just connect billions and billions and billions of nerves, and it's so infinitely complex. So yes, the eyeball itself is just like that's one standalone And we have doctors here, I felt like, that's a standalone organ, you just swap it out and swap it in, you're good to go. But if the optic nerve, which is the nerve that connects the eye to the brain, if that's severed or there's something wrong with that, right, theoretically you might be able to do it, but we're not anywhere near the capability of doing that because of the infinite complexity of the hardware being discussed.
So a heart transplant, which can be done and is done, that's not as complex as
Oh yeah, that's a few pipes,
Yeah,
essentially, right?
Right.
It's a few pipes. Either way, but God made that, Clearly we're talking about intelligence that's beyond what we could even conceive. And if God would do something as grandiose as the universe and Earth and humanity and the 8.7 million different species that grace this planet, clearly there has to be some sort of purpose. And that's kind of taking it to philosophy 2.0, where once we establish the idea of God, that heavily implies, that there must be some sort of purpose. And that's a whole other question that we have to ask is, okay, let's assume God does exist. Well, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for humanity? What does it mean for the universe? Clearly, now something has to happen. There has to be some sort of ultimate purpose or universal purpose, because otherwise, then we know that this great intelligence would not do something as big or as massive in scale as creating the universe. So that's a question that's grappled a lot in Jewish philosophy. And we found that there's basically two streams of thought in answering this question. Right? And once again, the question is, why did God create the universe? Not, we're taking for granted that God does indeed exist, and therefore we imply that there is some purpose. What's that purpose? So position number one is that God indeed was lacking, and God was lacking the fact that God could not give. Pre-universe, there's just God, right? If you want to, we'll talk about this in the scientific terms. So pre-Big Bang. So what existed? There was nothing. There was no time. There's no space. There's no matter really, essentially. It's just God, and there's nothing else to bestow goodness to. So even though God essentially, fundamentally, on his own accord, is not lacking anything, there is nothing to give to others. There's no other entities to be receptacles of God's goodness. So there's no arena where God could be good, so to speak. Therefore, God creates the universe in order to have creatures or creations onto whom God can bestow goodness.
What was the initial plan when he created the world?
What do you mean?
Or did he
He
create
was
it?
bored.
Well, that will be the answer. That's exactly what we're talking about. That he created it in order to create receptacles of his goodness. Now, let me flesh that out a little bit. Now, okay, so just give us the goodness. You look around the world, you see a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of tragedy. We had a tragic story in the Torch family this past week, where one of our students, he studies with a rabbi every week, and he comes to events, and he is an avid cyclist, and he had a tragic accident, and he passed away. Just Tuesday or Wednesday morning. He was the fittest 65-year-old you'll ever meet. He did 40 or 50 miles a day. And he hit a log in the middle of what's scrolling, fell on his head, and he died. It's a tragedy. Life is full of those events. And maybe not as devastating as something like that, but life is full of these kind of events. So the question is, okay, well, where's all the goodness? Now we could argue, well, there's a lot of goodness. We have relationships, and we have life, and we have ideas, and we have creativity, and we have food, and we have a lot of good things as well. But overall, we see a lot of tragedy as well. So where's the goodness, and why is it just not infused to everyone? Why are we just not on on acid highs just all the time, just feeling fantastic? So this theory continues that God wanted to do good, but God wanted to do the ultimate good, right? A good lacking nothing. And if God were to just give us the goodness without us earning it, then it will be considered bread of shame. This is the famous bread of shame concept in Judaism, whereas if you just get gifted something, if you don't earn it, you don't enjoy, you don't appreciate it as much.
You feel guilty.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good. So therefore, God created the Almighty created this entire structure wherein humans can achieve the goodness, provided that they earn it. Now, how do we earn the goodness? Via free will.
Good deeds.
By following God's command.
But by using which tool? By using free will. Thus, humans are at the center of the purpose, of God's purpose, because we are the ones that have capacity to do free will. We'll get that a little bit later on. It's only humans that are capable of that. And by exercising our free will, we enable ourselves to be worthy of receiving God's goodness, thus fulfilling the purpose of the universe. So the point that I wanted to bring here, I know this is essentially, this is a big topic, there's a lot of different moving parts here, but the point I want to bring is that according to this position in the purpose of the world and why God created everything, which is a pretty heavy weighted question, the answer essentially lies in man choosing to do good and thus enabling them to be a receptacle of God's goodness. So what I want to point out is that free will is at the core of the purpose of existence, according to this theory. Now, the other theory as to why God created the world is that God also was lacking. What was God lacking? The fact that there was no independent verification of his dominion. Now, even though pre the world, before that Big Bang, God was in complete control, however, there was no one independently verifying that. Now, God creates humans. Humans have the capacity, as born out in their free will, to choose to accept the existence of God or to reject it. A lot of people in the world have the capability, despite the overwhelming evidence, to reject the idea of God. And that's totally up there, and God allows that.
Now, why would God care?
What?
Why would God care that somebody would recognize him or not recognize him?
Okay,
Why was that necessary to him? Or whatever.
So this is a tricky question, because this is the kind of pretzel questions that frequently happen in these conversations. So you're saying that why God would care is a very hard question for us to answer, because we don't know why God does things. But okay, I'm not trying to weasel out of answering your question. What I'm saying is that the reality of God's kingdom before or God's dominion or God's control, or however you want to phrase it, that changes when there's no possibility for rejecting that. Right? That much we could all agree upon. Right? The fact that humans can either attest to the existence of God or reject that, which is, by the way, linked to the whole Tikkun Olam, the world's broken because humans reject God, that can fundamentally change with the creation. You're asking why? That's a very good question. I'm not gonna try to. It's a good question, but it essentially is an unanswerable question, because we don't know why God does things, or why God, from His perspective.
I thought, Rabbi, you said earlier. Okay.
From His perspective, as opposed to from our perspective.
Well, wasn't it from His perspective that you said earlier? One of the reasons is before creation there was no receptacle for God's goodness.
Well, I'm saying there's two parallel, I would argue, philosophies into answering this question.
Okay.
I mean, you could have asked the same question on the first theory. Well, why would God want to do good? We don't know why God would want to do good, but we know that God can do good once humanity is in existence.
We're talking about faith.
Well, no. I'm saying you're asking a question from God's perspective, right? And this is a subtle point. I know we're going through it kind of quickly because we have a lot to cover today, but there's a subtle point in saying that when we try to look at the world from God's view, we have a very hard time actually understanding things, because we don't know what God from His perspective. We can look at God and try to theorize from our perspective. Thus, from our perspective, we do indeed see that now that humans exist post-creation, now there's a receptacle for good. Well, why would God want that? That's your question. That's a good question. We don't know why God would want that. but that reality does exist. Similarly, does God need us to stroke his ego? You know,
Maybe.
I don't know.
What would be a master?
Well, I mean, what
Yeah,
would
but
he
that
do
seems-
if he didn't create the universe?
Yeah.
Then what? What is he there for? He has to have his
But that's
purpose also.
no, but that's once again the idea of this parallel realities means that the rules don't apply necessarily. The same rules that apply to us. The fact that we exist, right? That is because we have a purpose. Because we at one point didn't exist. Your question is only valid if God at one point didn't exist, which is not true because
Well,
that's
we
the
don't know.
creation
Yeah.
of the definition of God.
But I mean, if he had all this power and didn't use it, what did he need all this power for?
It's like but that's once again assuming that the power was granted,
Yeah.
which is a rejection of the idea of God.
Then you have to say who, all that.
Right. So that's who created God? Well, no one created God, right? So we're trying to apply the rules for us,
Yes.
the same rules that apply for us.
Wasn't God by definition just always was, right?
That's right. So what happened before that? Well, nothing happened before that. There was no time even before that. Why does God need something? That's a question can only be asked if that was gifted or granted or bestowed to him, which it wasn't. These are hard things for us to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, because most religions try to make God an anthropomorphic type of being,
Correct.
and we being mortal can't possibly understand an infinite energy.
So we want to try to use the terms that we're familiar with.
Right.
Right. Do you understand the idea of God existing outside of time? Is that something we should understand? That God exists today as much as he existed in 1952 and 2052? Is that an idea that you're comfortable with? No, because how could you exist in multiple time points at the same time? Do you have an answer to that?
No.
Okay, so the rules don't necessarily apply. It's a different paradigm, and therefore the fact of what was life like before God, that's not a question that is a real question. Let's move on. Either way, the point that I wanted to bring here is that also, according to the second position in purpose for existence, free will plays a big part, because our free will choices in accepting God or rejecting God, that contributes towards fulfillment of the purpose. So essentially, either way, whichever approach you want to take in understanding the purpose of existence, from the Jewish perspective, free will is at the core of what we do to complete that purpose. So this kind of should help us, maybe see the scope of free will and how it plays a part in our life, but not only in our life, essentially in the existence of all of humanity and all of existence. That's point number one. Point number two, we mentioned this briefly, but free will is a uniquely human quality. And it's a fundamental and essential human quality. We're all familiar with the verse in Genesis that man is created in the image of God. Everyone's familiar with that? Now, if you accept the idea of God, you reject the idea of any image for God. Right? So do we look like God? No.
What is the Hebrew word for image?
Tselem.
Does
It's
it-
Tselem Elohim.
And does it literally mean reflection? What is it?
Yeah, image of God is a good translation. So what does that mean? We're all familiar with that. So it means there's something special about humans. We know that if you just even read Genesis, perfunctory reading of Genesis would make it very clear that there's something very, very unique and special about Adam. And the fact that, for example, Adam was the only one that was created as a single entity. Adam is the last one that's created after everything else is done. And God blows into his nostrils. What does that even mean? But man is created in the image of God. What does that mean? We're told that man is special. Like humanity is something very special about humanity. And then we find the statement that he's in the image of God. We share some sort of parallel with God, which is a striking thought. We said God doesn't play by the same rules, doesn't exist under the same framework as we do. Yet we're created in the image of God. We're told by many, many, many sources. This is proved, this entire book proving this point, that the fact that man is created in the image of God, that means that man has free will like God. That there is only two entities that are capable of free will: God and man. Not angels, not animals. Man and God are the only two entities that can do that.
That's what image means in that context?
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
man looks like God. It's,
No, it means that man's essential quality is similar to God.
Okay.
Now, the question that I hope you'll ask me is, wait a minute, my dog likes vanilla ice cream and absolutely hates tuna fish, right? So that's a choice as well. So what do we mean when we talk about free will and free will choices and the fact that only humans have it and nothing else have it? And what angels, what do you mean? Angels are super powerful and awesome entities, and how come they don't have it? You know, they're way more spiritual than humans are.
But they're only,
But they didn't incarnate into human form.
They didn't incarnate, or they take no human form. What does that mean?
They take no human form.
So what about humans makes us capable of free will?
God gives us free will.
Well, when he breathes into us, we become godlike.
Yeah, but angels are also godlike. They're super spiritual.
They don't take
But-
human form.
But God doesn't need to take human form, right? We know
We're
that.
not talking about God, we're talking about angels.
Okay,
They aren't created the same. The angels are created lower than God.
that's true. But humans are even lower than angels on the spiritual totem pole.
That's why we were created last.
Angels don't have free will because in their realm, God's presence is visible and known. You know, because God is hidden, then
So those have.
that provides the opportunity. Plus, we have bodies that need food and sleep and all these other things. And angels,
the angels only do what God tells them to do.
Yeah, the angels don't have,
They don't have
a
any
choice.
free
They're
will.
just,
They're just spiritual beings. They're just messengers.
To follow up on this point, so human is unique that they have free will. Yet we're less spiritual than the angels.
We're a
We were-
combination of earth and heaven.
Booyah, exactly. The Hebrew word for man is Adam, right? And we know that in Hebrew, the etymology of the word, a word underscores its meaning. So if you're able to understand the word, the root of the word, it might shed light on the actual meaning of the word and the function of the word. So the word Adam, man, the Talmud asks the question, what does the word man mean? What does Adam mean? And it gives two answers. It says, Adam is either Adamah, which means earth, very physical, very sedentary, not very special or unique. And in fact, if you inter a human body into the earth, it kind of, after a few years, becomes indistinguishable. On one hand, and then we're Adameh, which means to be similar. And the Talmud says to be similar to God. Man is half earth and half God, essentially. Or similar to God, not God. Adameh, similar to God, right? And we are this fusion of, on one hand, we have the soul, the godly soul that's blowed into our nostrils, right? We're like an angel a little bit on our soul side, yet we're like an animal on our body side. And these two opposites are kind of married together, fused together, even though they don't seem to be very harmonious, because they're essentially opposites. It's like taking the two opposite sides of a magnet and just forcing them together and just binding them together. In fact, the Talmud says, it's actually a midrash, that every single second that a soul is encapsulated in a body and wants to leave. Our soul wants to leave. Well, what happens when your soul leaves your body? You die. You're dead. So every second our soul wants to commit suicide, which is insane. And suicide is against Torah law. And our soul should know better. But our soul wants to commit suicide because the pain of being in a human body for a soul is so unbearing that it wants to just leave. It's as if you take the most precious, holy, special, unique element, totally spiritual, and you put it into essentially an animal. Our body is an animal. Like someone mentioned, we have instincts. We're driven by temptation. You know, our body wants us to not think about these big world questions and not kind of question about life and purpose and meaning. It wants us to have pleasure and have physical pleasure. That's what our body wants. No different than an animal. Yet we have this other whole side of us where we want to ponder about life. We want to ask existential questions. We want to try to find meaning in life. We want to do good. We want to live for a purpose. We want to be special. We want to be remembered. We want to have a legacy. Like, these are things that are not animalistic. Yet we all are familiar with those emotions, with those thoughts. We're able to think about things that are beyond our life and our perspective and our consciousness. We're able to just ponder about the cosmos and think about God, or think about ideas and think about history, and think about what's going to be after we die. These are uniquely human qualities, and they're a result of the fact that we have a soul as well. If we ignore our soul entirely, right, well, they're no different than animals. And in fact, we're kind of pretty weak animals because, we can't really run that fast. We don't climb trees that well. We don't survive so much in really bad or extreme temperatures. Like, our bodies, if you just isolate our bodies and, if we live like animals, we would be, pretty weak animals. Easy prey. But we have our intelligence, and we have our human side that makes us, very capable of kind of being above animals. Because we have something different, something special. We have our intelligence, we have our soul. This tension, this friction, this conflict is essentially where our free will lies. Our free will lies in this reality where we have opposing worldviews dominating us, essentially. Fundamentally, we're composed of opposite agendas. Our soul has an agenda, our body has an agenda, and both of them essentially are harbored within ourselves. And like we talked about, we want to leave a legacy, we want to have a purpose. But we want to also just sit on the couch and watch TV all day. But those things are in conflict. We all want to do. We want to relax. We want to just veg out, as they say. We want to just eat a lot of really unhealthy food because it tastes good. But we want to be healthy and live a long life and see our grandkids. How is it possible that we're so conflicted? Well, we're conflicted because we have different motivators and opposing motivators within ourselves. And that creates the conflict, and that's where we need to choose. We have to choose on an individual action level, like what am I going to do something that is good for me short term, what my body wants, or something long term, what my soul wants, on an individual action. Also on a life path, what life path am I going to choose? Am I going to kind of delay gratification, which is a uniquely human? Only a human could do that. Only a human could say no to small pleasure now in order of hopes of big pleasure 8 years down the line after I get my after I finish medical school. Right? That's a uniquely human thing because that is channeling the power of the soul. That is a free will choice where someone's opting on a big picture, on a life path, to do something that's more meaningful, that's a greater purpose, that's a bigger payout, but it's delayed gratification. It's a lot of hard work till I get there. Right? These are examples of a human choosing to be a human. Right? A human actually doing something that is not what their body wants. That's not what an animal would choose. But they're doing it because they have this, physiologically they're composed of a soul. And they're following the soul's agenda. Thus, the free will choice of life and good and death and bad is choosing between these different motivators that we all have. And we have to make these decisions. Am I going to choose what my body wants, what my Yetzer Hara wants, my evil inclination wants, or what my soul wants, or what my Yetzer Tov wants? Right? Which is more meaningful, but is usually more work. I want to say one more point here before we kind of dig a little bit deeper here. Well, 2 more points. Now, I mentioned this already earlier, so I'll just quickly scurry through it. Torah, how does Torah fit into this model? We mentioned from the book of the Chinuch, the book of education, which is a 13th century book which enumerates all 613 mitzvahs and gives a little flavor behind it. And he writes in his introduction that the purpose of Torah is to empower the soul. I mean, we think of the Torah as being the purpose. What he's saying is that the Torah is to help us in making these free will choices. I mean, this conflict, this decision-making process that we have to go through every day of our lives, that is the goal. That is what defines success and failure of a human in life. The Torah is the tool that helps us to empower our soul on one hand, right? To focus on the intellectual aspects of the Torah, to sharpen our mind, to talk about the spiritual aspects of the Torah, to hone our soul. But also, look, you read the Torah, it talks about how you have to limit your body and say no to your inclination. And, you want to eat this, but you can't. You want to do this Shabbat, but you can't. Right? All these things that you can't do, but all of them are directed at limiting, inhibiting the body. Thus, on both ends of this equation, it's going to help us empower one side and weaken the other side, and thus making our ultimate goal, or the hopes of us choosing life and choosing good, more likely to happen. But also, additionally, I want to just kind of get a little bit more granular on this point. We find a verse in Genesis where it says as follows: "Behold, man has become like the unique one among us." Sorry, I'll say it a little slower. "Behold, man has become like the unique one among us, knowing good and bad." Once again, we see this dichotomy of good versus bad, and it's a uniquely human. It's God. Man is special, and he's like God, that he knows good and bad. And Rashi, the great French medieval commentator, right, the number one commentator in all of Torah, and all of Talmud, and all of the Jewish Bible, and everything basically, he says as follows. He says, "This is the unique quality of man. This is what makes man special." What's that?
Differentiate good from evil, or the choice.
Right. Well, I thought I thought the answer would be that we have the ability to choose. Well, he takes it a step earlier. To perceive the good and the bad. Just the mere knowledge of that there's something good and there's something bad, that's uniquely human. He takes it a step earlier. The ability to choose good and bad, that's predicated on the realization that there is good and bad. And animals can't do that. Right? We know that there's good and there's bad. So however you want to, whatever particular free will conflict you have, you could know if you freeze out and zoom out of the scenario, you'll know, well, what's the good side, what's the bad side. Go ahead.
At the risk of getting a little in the weeds, I hope this doesn't come across as a stupid point or question, but a dog, okay, dogs, okay, for example, different dogs, could we agree they have different personalities?
Yeah,
Maybe
sure.
they can't
Sure.
think the way we...
Sure.
But a dog that is, say, vicious by nature, or that say, bites, versus one that's always licking you, isn't there some sort of thought process there? Is there some sort of judgment?
Yeah. So I would...
Maybe evolutionary.
No, the argument that I would make is that, well, you see children as well. Children are not capable of this kind of free will choices. Yet a kid who acts bad, and you say, don't do that, or you warn them, or whatever parenting methods you like to use, but you say, oh, if you do really well, you get a candy, or whoever motivated you see that they're sometimes torn between these kind of conflicts as well. But yet we know they don't have a Yetzer Tov. Their soul is not developed, essentially. They're almost entirely dominated by their body, and But I would make the argument that is more of sometimes that there could be a free will choice. Well, I don't like to call it free will because I like to reserve that for a more higher decision making. But it's essentially what's going to give me the most pleasure. It's more of like the same.
So a dog that likes to lick is following its instincts.
No, I mean dogs. Animals emotionally, animals are no different than humans. This is another important point. The fact that you see an animal grieving or the animal protecting its young, that doesn't mean that's it. No one ever argued that that's a human. That's a uniquely human quality. And the fact that an animal wants pleasure, that everyone agrees, right? Like a body wants pleasure. Like our body, we want pleasure. And when you have to choose if you want to eat this or that, well, you're also making a choice. But it's not a choice that involves these two elementary elements of who you are. It's not you're not pitting the soul against the body. You're pitting the body against the body, essentially. Do I want chocolate? I count on the mood of that, or I want vanilla. Do I want to bite someone, but then I'll be castigated by my master, or I'll withhold him that, and then he'll tap me on my back and I'll feel good. That's a choice, but it's not a choice that's involving two separate, opposite, divergent elements of their entity, of their existence. Now, I want to say one more point that makes it a little clearer. I might have mentioned this, but I don't think I mentioned it over here. A hunger strike. I might have mentioned it, yeah? We went through this argument. So yes, hunger strike. Hunger strike is, now, okay, you'll say, the fact that if an animal is upset over the loss of one of its children and doesn't eat for a couple of days, that's not a hunger strike. A hunger strike is what Nathan Sharansky did in the 80s, where he went 120 days without eating food. And every 2 days, they would take a pipe and shove it down his esophagus and pour this protein mix down his throat. That's a hunger strike, right? And that is something that only a human can do. Why? Because a human is essentially making a choice to stand up for what they believe in, stand up for their soul, even if it's entirely in opposition to what their body wants. The body wants food. It cares about survival almost above all else. And therefore, the body is pining for food. And it wants to survive. And the soul is able to say, no, we're going to go against that because we want to make a statement. Right? That's something that's not possible. That's an example of a body and a soul both having a desire for a certain outcome. And the body really, really, really wants the food. And it's being presented to you right there on the silver platter. And you're saying, no, I don't want that. Because I'm choosing what my soul wants, what my kind of higher existence wants. That an animal's not incapable of, because it doesn't have that other. It doesn't have a soul. We don't give an animal a bark mitzvah. Sorry. The conversation has devolved. I apologize. But because it doesn't have that same reality. It doesn't have those two opposing realities. The fact that it can choose to do one position over the other doesn't mean that it has a soul. But getting back to this Rashi, Rashi tells us that so man is like us to know good and bad. To me, this was an incredible insight that I had over the weekend. I always thought that man is different than animals, that man can make choices. It turns out that it's even more elementary than that, even more basic than that. The mere knowledge of the existence of good and bad is something that animals don't have. And I was thinking to extend this a little further, that a sense of morality, just recognition of there is good and there is bad, I would argue can only be possible if we can act upon that. Let's assume we're pre-programmed. We're just following, we're just tracing in the lines. We're just doing what we are designed to do. Well, then we shouldn't have any feelings towards it being good or bad. It's just what we're doing. The fact that we recognize that something is good versus something is bad, that essentially proves that we can choose to do good or bad, which to me is an incredible deep insight. That's a profound idea. The mere recognition of good and bad, that is what differentiates us from animals, because that is essentially proof or evidence that we can choose good or bad. So I would argue that if someone can have the conceptualization of that there is good and there is bad, they have to agree that we're not pre-programmed to just act. Because if we were, well then how can we view something as good or bad? It's just what we're doing or what we're not doing. Which is, to me, it was a startling insight. And that's what Rashi's saying. Rashi's saying, as opposed to animals, why are we different? What's unique about us? What's the defining characteristic of man? Perhaps it's this idea. We could recognize good and bad. And that's it. And once we recognize that, of course, we can act upon that if we so choose.
So when in infancy or youngster, when is that present? Is there a way that you just keep feeding the infant and they grow up and they don't have any experiences or anything like that? They're not going to...
I would make the argument that it's possible for someone to live their entire lives and never actually tap into this tremendous power. Means if these ideas are never part of your purview, right? If you never encounter them, if you don't develop the sensitivity of the soul, so to speak, that's our job as parents to talk about, doing what's good. As a parent, you're telling a child, why don't you share with your friend? Now, the child does not want to share with a friend, but you're opening up, a thought in their mind. You're planting a seed that hopefully will develop that is going to, expose their soul.
Well, it reminds me there's this condition, marasmus, you know the word? Where there's no stimulation. It's like in these orphanages, like Romania, Russia, there's no stimulation and they just die. Even though they're fed and all that, there's no interaction with other people. They just they just die.
They're like robots, essentially.
Yeah. But I mean, the little kids
That
die
actually
very young.
die.
They
Wow.
just no stimulation. Yeah. So it's MORASMUS.
It's as if like their souls just check out. We're done.
Yeah, well, if you're dealing with, I didn't learn it about it as a soul.
No, but in this context,
yes.
means the soul's not nourished at all.
Right.
It just says, okay, I'm out of here. I'm done.
I have a question. If you're going to address it later, don't worry about it. But is the where I'm not clear on is the evil inclination and the good inclination the same as the body and the soul, or is that separate?
So I think that the body and the evil inclination are aligned, and the soul and the good inclination are aligned as well. However, I think that the distinction is that an inclination is not something which is essential to who you are. You are not your evil inclination.
Okay.
Right? You have an evil inclination, just like you have a nice shirt. It's something you have, it's yours, and it contributes to trying to compel you to do one thing, but it's not who you are. Man is body and soul fused together. That's essentially the hardware, so to speak. Now you also have other influences as well.
Because it sounds like if we did not have an evil inclination, that our soul would dominate. That's why that was necessary.
Yeah, and this is leading into the next thing I want to talk about. But how exactly this model? What's the model of the body versus the soul and the evil inclination? And how does the evil inclination kind of level the playing field? Okay. So we find a Mishnah in the book of the Chapters of the Fathers. Chapters of the Fathers is about 2,000-year-old compendium of ethics. And it'll give like a very, one line of an idea, but it has a lot. There's a lot of insight incorporated behind these ideas. So I'm going to read you what it says here. This is from Ben Azai. Ben Azai was this remarkable scholar who had this bravado. Because when you read the Talmud, you read the dialogue that they had. He said. Famously, he's like, there's no scholar that can rival me besides for that bald guy. And Rabbi Akiva was that bald guy. He says, besides for this bald guy, no one else could touch me. Remarkable. And he was the one, by the way, who said, he was talking about the importance of procreation. And one opinion says, if someone doesn't procreate, it's as if they murdered. So important to procreate. Another opinion says that if someone doesn't procreate, it's as if they're diminishing from the glory of God. Comes along Ben Azai and says, if someone doesn't procreate, it's as if they murder and they diminish the glory in God. And someone says to him, excuse me, Ben Azai, you're not married. You're not procreating. So you're essentially not practicing what you're preaching. So he says to them, what can I do? My heart desires Torah, and Torah alone. And it points out that he actually was married, but he couldn't handle it, and he got divorced, and and that's Ben Azai. That's the character. And he says as follows: run to do a small mitzvah like a big mitzvah, and run away from a sin. Why? Because a mitzvah drags another mitzvah, begets another mitzvah, and a sin begets another sin. The reward for one mitzvah is another mitzvah, and the reward for one sin is another sin. So there's obviously a lot to unpack here. But it starts off with the following statement. You run, chase after a minor mitzvah like a major mitzvah, and run away from a sin. Run away from a sin. Now, what does this imply? Right. Chase after a small mitzvah, like a big mitzvah. Right. Don't say, it's a small mitzvah, it's a minor mitzvah, I'm not going to chase it. I'll only chase the big ones. No, chase even a small one, like a big one. But run away, flee from a sin. What does that tell us?
It's about habits, building habits.
What?
Building habits.
Okay.
It tells me that there's not a degree of mitzvah,
That there's not a...
a hierarchy. of
But
mitzvah.
but it kind of does say, it says that there's a minor mitzvah and there's a major mitzvah. It does say that, right? But it says you shouldn't make that choices.
No,
No,
it
it
says
said,
a
you
mitzvah
said
is a
little,
mitzvah.
little mitzvahs.
If
Minor
it's really
mitzvah.
small,
Minor.
that will bring on a larger one eventually.
Oh, well, what else can we deduce? I'll say it again. Chase after a minor mitzvah, like a major mitzvah, and run away from a sin. Anybody has any other insights?
I was thinking of just opening the door for somebody else. That's something, that was nothing, I can do that. But
That's a minor
in
mitzvah,
way,
let's
that's
assume.
very minor. I took the time and I saw behind me there's another lady coming, another man coming, or somebody who is physically disabled, and I opened the door. To me, that's a mitzvah because it's the right thing to do, whether it's I'm opening the door.
So we would argue that that's a minor mitzvah. It's not so hard to
But
do.
still, that could be, somebody could see me do that and say, that was nice of her, then she might let the next person in, and you might choose a chain of reaction.
And that's how a mitzvah begets another mitzvah?
Pay it
Yeah.
forward.
That's
Pay
what
it
Yeah,
forward.
one gets to
Pay
the
it
other.
forward.
Okay, there's something else here. Chase after a minor mitzvah.
Run to do good.
No, run after it. What does that imply?
It is in front of you.
That it's running away from you. You got to chase it down. And run away from a sin. What does that imply? It's chasing you. What it's telling us is that the odds are against us, right? The odds was heavily stacked against us.
Body is going one way, the soul's going another.
The mitzvah is fleeing from us. We have to chase it down, and the sin is chasing after us. Who is more dominant in the soul body paradigm? Our body.
Say the bottom.
About
Big
the
time.
sin, yeah, right.
We are being compelled to sin in a much greater frequency than we are compelled to do a mitzvah. Now, when we say sin and mitzvah, we mean follow our body, follow our instinct.
Doesn't the Torah say that? Doesn't it say the proclivity of man is evil from his youth or
It
something
says
like
the,
that?
Yetzel v'adam Rabban Unov, yes.
the way of a young heart is toward evil or something along those lines.
The inclination of man is evil from his youth.
Right.
That's in the beginning of Genesis. Not all the beginning, like 10th chapter. Right? So what it's telling us is that the sin is chasing us. Our body is just dominant. We feel it instantly. Like when you want to, like we said, when you want to follow the agenda of your body, you feel it. We're connected. We're linked on a sensory level to our body. We don't feel our soul. We have to chase after it. We have to try to find meaning, but it's not here and present and now and available and right there. And alarming and striking and tangible for us. Yet, so how is that fair? Where's the free will? Where's the free choice? Where's the balance? Where's the parity when we have this model where the sin is chasing us? We're much more likely to, if we stand stationary, we don't do anything. What's going to happen? We'll sin. We'll follow our body, and we won't follow our soul. Is that right? If the body is chasing us and the soul's running away from us, well, then if we do nothing, right? We'll just stay in the same place. And what'll happen is the sin will overtake us, and the mitzvah will flee further and further away from us. Essentially, it's telling us if we do nothing, our body is in control. Our body is dominant. Our soul is recessive. Is recessive the right word, or is less dominant? Ephemeral. Right? That's the reality. Now, why would that be? Is that fair? Which seems like it should be equal. If it seems like either both of them chasing us, both of them fleeing from us, and then we'll be able to choose. Do we want to chase the good or do we want to chase the bad? So I think that this is the point that Dan brought up. It feels a lot the pleasure of doing what's right if we were driven the same way to chase good and bad, or both of them were chasing us either way. everyone would opt to do good. Right? It's good, and we know it's good. We already established that. We know it's good. Right? We realize it's good. And if they were equally attainable, then we would all just choose good. And then, once again, there's no free will. So the free will balance is that the good is harder, but it's good. And the payout is much greater. But the bad, or the body, is much easier to choose, and it's much more tempting. That's why the temptation is much greater, but the payout is weaker, and that's why we want to choose good, but it's hard, and therefore there's parity. So essentially, it's that's how I would argue the relationship of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov versus the soul and the body. If it was just soul and body, well, everyone would choose soul.
It's like
Simple.
fighting Satan.
How's
I mean,
that?
the same, Carla, you have the good, and you have Satan on the other side fighting, You're saying Satan is the body.
Okay, let's assume that.
I mean, it's just
Yeah.
a similar thing. And then the soul, or doing good is the other side. And they're always in conflict.
But
The same thing.
isn't that more, because that gets in, I don't know if that's relevant to this, but maybe it is. I mean, isn't that more the Christian perspective?
Yeah.
Yes, that's why anytime I say the word Satan, we think of Christians.
Yes.
Yeah,
No, I know
but
that.
Right, but
there is
Yetzer Hara, evil
there is
inclination.
a Jewish concept of Satan.
Right, but it doesn't exactly. It's very different. I mean, the idea of any entity existing outside of the scope or the power or the dominion of God, that's not a Jewish idea. But with the Jewish idea of Satan, which once again, like many of the ideas that the Christians have, was plagiarized from the Jews. We preceded them. So the fact that we have an idea called Satan and they do doesn't mean that we copied them.
They copied us.
It didn't matter. I wasn't saying anything.
Yeah. So
Copied
yeah,
together.
but the
It's
role
just
of the Satan,
similar
the role of Satan
ideas.
is that's the angel.
The adversary.
That's the adversary. That's right. The angel
So
that's
there
not
is
going to
a-
compel man to sin, but going to.
So there is a being. Satan is in Jewish thought an angel.
Yes.
So
It's an angel that's doing the will of God. That's right.
an angel that did what?
That does the will of God.
And does the evil will of God.
No, not the.
The accuser?
Yes, it's evil. It's a kind of almost a natural result of this reality that our actions have to have consequences. In order for there to be meaning in life. We'll get this a little bit later on as well.
I'm just trying to understand the contrast between the Christian.
Yes.
So in Christianity, Satan is his own independent entity.
As if like there's a good God and bad God,
Yeah.
In the Jewish faith, there's only one power. All power is consolidated in God's hands.
Okay.
Now, the idea of an angel is essentially a spiritual force that fulfills God's will. So God wants to tell Abraham, I want to heal you. He sends an angel called Angel Raphael who heals God. Who heals Abraham. I apologize for that. Now, there's this angel or force called the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, that God gives man to try to compel him to follow the body's agenda. Now, there's another element of that angel, where is that angel essentially takes the result of the free will choices and presents it in a portfolio of man's successes and failures to God, and is the argument, the arguer or the accuser to try to highlight the misdeeds of man. And there's a third element of that called the angel of death, which is in charge of extracting man's soul when their time has come. These are all angels that are commanded by God to fulfill certain functions. No power on their own.
Like in the Passover, the angel of death passes over.
That's right.
So, I just really want to nail this down. But so the Christians believe that God is more powerful than Satan, but Satan is his own independent entity. He's not getting his power from God or his whatever.
We've already established he's an angel, right? So there is no.
I'm sorry?
We've already established Satan,
Yes.
as an angel.
That's right.
Okay. So he has no choice, no net.
That's right.
All right.
It's on his own has no value.
But again,
Only exists because God,
Allows it.
yes,
Okay,
wills
so what
it
do
to
the
exist.
Christians? But do the
The Christians
That God created Satan?
means the idea of like worshiping Satan. That's a Christian idea where you want to like worship this other power on its own entity. That's the evil power, so to speak. Either way, I'm not such an expert in Christian theology, but that's the idea. Yeah?
So I hate to jump into this. Is there hell? Do you believe there's hell?
Once again, another idea, another topic where there is a Jewish version, we call it Gehenna, which is vastly different than the Christian hell or purgatory, whatever you want to call it. So yes, I do believe, to answer your question.
So is that angel in charge of hell?
No.
In the Jewish philosophy?
No. And what hell is vastly different than what the Christians say. It's not this eternal damnation. It's a certain cleansing process. Actually, a good place to end up in
Redeem yourself.
redeem. We don't like to use the word redeem, but purify,
More like purgatory.
purify, or
So in Judaism,
cleanse.
it's not a bad place.
It's actually a very, very good place to end up.
It's like purgatory or something where you're getting ready to go.
Yeah. You take us. It's like cleanse. It's a cleanse. It's a shower. We did. Yes.
It sounds like the soul going through a power washer.
Yes.
Before you actually go into.
If you want to hear more about it,
Hell is not a bad thing.
go to my website, rabbiwalby.com. At my website, rabbiwalby.com, I think I gave at least 2 classes on this topic. I know I gave one here. What happens after you die, I think is how I titled it. Go through all this in great detail. What happens after you die? Very interesting. All of that I know not from personal experience. Either way, so
But that is what we're talking about next time, to some degree, the resurrection, Messianic era.
Oh, is that what's on my next week?
Yeah.
Okay, so then come back next week.
Yeah, we're gonna hit that.
Stay
more depth.
tuned.
Yes.
Okay, I got to prepare for that. Okay, so let's kind of I want to broaden the discussion here. So we kind of have some definitions, working definitions of what free will is, what kind of role it plays in our lives, in essentially the purpose for humanity, how the interrelationship of the body and the soul and the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Tov, and how, in order to create parity or just capability of free choice, the body has to be dominant. In Judaism, we say, so we essentially established that everything is really about free choice. Everything is about free choice. And the question that you would have is, okay, so if all of the universe was really about, free choice, and it's only humans are capable of free choice, not animals, not angels, well, why do animals exist? Why do angels exist? Why do we have such a diverse universe with so much? Just have humans, let us make free will choices, and that's it, mazel tov. Why does that have to be so much more, at least, from our perspective? There's a lot more. We said 8.7 million, which is, by the way, as an estimate. It's, the lowest estimate I saw was 1.25 million species, and the biggest estimate is 8.7. That's a lot of species, right? We're humans are relatively minor, I guess. We're just one of the many species out there. So why create all of that? And why create all the cosmos? And why create everything? Just create humans and put us in an arena and let us slug it out with free choice decisions. So essentially we're saying, well, this is the answer. The answer is that everything is designed, everything is either a human making free will choices or creating opportunities for free will choices. Everything. So when we look up at the sky, we see the cosmos, and we get an insight into the grandiosity of the universe. That creates a free will choice. We see animals. You see an animal that's just designed in such a wonderful way to fend off predators, and no other animal seemingly has this capability. Well, you could choose to use this as a way of recognition of God. You could use this for what your soul wants to use it. You could ignore it. And then you just checked another box on the body's agenda, right? Everything that you encounter is a free will choice, right? This table, it could be used for what we're using it for, to talk about Torah, talk about ideas. This is a fulfillment of this table's kind of purpose. In it, we're making a free will choice to choose to have a soul-based agenda conversation about it, over it. We could use it for something else. We could use it to talk about gossip. or to talk bad about someone else, or to, I don't know, any one of them. We just use it to ignore life and just sit and put food in it and just frolic away. We could, right? Then that's what our body probably wants us to ignore the bigger questions in life. But everything essentially is that. So, think about that. Everything that your car, your house, your everything is designed to create as many opportunities for free will as possible. Number one. Number two, let's assume we didn't have free will. And I'm going to get this a little. I grappled with how to structure this class or discussion because there's a lot of different avenues to approach this topic. Up till last night, like at 2 a.m, I was going to talk about this first. Because a lot of people really question free will. I don't know if anyone here does, but it's one of the opinions of people that I hold in high esteem is that free will or rejection of the reality of free will is the last frontier of heresy. Because essentially, when someone says there's no free will, they're essentially rejecting God. It's an element of rejection of faith. Yet, a lot of people don't believe in free will today.
Predestination idea that
Right.
God has decided
We'll get to
what
that.
people do.
We're going to get to that.
Upward Wilson said the devil made me do.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I want everyone to realize what they're essentially saying if they say that there's no free will. Right? Number one, they're saying that there's no meaning in life. Booyah.
There's no what?
There cannot be meaning in life, right? If I'm just a pawn in some bigger picture, right? If I'm just doing what I was programmed to do, well, then I have zero meaning, right? My actions, my success and failure only matter because they're not guaranteed, because they're not assured.
Isn't that basically existentialism? If you don't believe in free will, isn't that basically what existentialism is?
You give us the definition of existentialism.
Well, it's my understanding existentialism is just, you exist, but there's no purpose there.
Something like
We're
maybe
all matter just flowing through the universe.
Maybe like
and
nihilism.
We die and become matter.
Nihilism, I think, is
But
the.
that is sort of like the ultimate free will.
Well, there's a free will to choose that. But if we are not.
Free will can't change destiny of we all become oblivion. Or we all
Yeah, but
become
that's.
oblivion.
But what's the result of that? The result is that we are essentially proclaiming that life has no meaning, which is, a pretty weighty result, right? If you're going to say that, just be careful when you say that. You have to know what it implies. If there's no free will, you're essentially saying, okay, there's no free will, then what's pre-programmed? If pre-programmed, then there can't be any meaning. The only meaning, the purpose that we can have in life is because our actions matter, and if we're pre-programmed, actions don't matter. Right? And like I say, we're just floating in the air. We're just molecules. And that's, I think if you say that, if you say that our actions, if life is meaningless, there's no purpose, we all kind of feel that there is a purpose, right? We feel that. We talked about that. We all have this feeling of a purpose.
Okay, maybe that's the wrong.
Now, additionally, I want to say, for our discussion, without free will is no Torah, obviously. The Torah is telling us, do this, do that, and if we're compelled, we're drawn, we're influenced in any way to choose a life path, an ideology, or even an action, an isolated action, we cannot be commanded to do otherwise. Right? If someone is forced to act in a certain way, then they cannot be told reasonably to act in a different way, obviously. But that extends obviously beyond Torah, but any form of instruction, like you want to instruct your children. If they're compelled to act one way, then why are you even wasting your time trying to tell them, act a different way? Obviously, trying to influence them, because there is a way to act otherwise. We live free will in our lives as well. Right? You're telling your kid, don't do that. Well, if there's no free will, or if our actions are, tailored, are scripted already, then okay. Well, why are we trying to influence anything? Just follow along. And we see within ourselves. I'm sure everyone's had this experience. Hopefully we had this experience where you made a choice and you changed something in your life. You decided, I want to wake up every day on time and whatever. And you did it. It was hard, and it got easier. Or you want to.
That could still have been pre-programmed. mean,
Yes,
theoretically,
yes,
of course.
yes, but when you do that, you feel like you're overcoming something,
Yeah.
and that feeling is kind of hard to. Maybe that was also programmed.
Well, that's what you have to say, you know.
Well,
No,
yeah,
I
it means
agree with
you're
you, but I
kind of putting yourself in a corner if you
But I
reject
mean,
free will.
there is a way for people to believe that. I mean, people,
Right.
I'm
And
sure
also,
there
I
are-
want to say lastly, like morality, just the idea of morality. That is not possible without choice. So when someone's saying there's no free will, they're saying that life has no purpose, there cannot exist any morality, any form of instruction is pointless, any character improvement. Right? Becoming a better person. Like, we're all sitting here because we want to become better people. We're essentially demonstrating that the free will exists. Right? We're choosing to do this to try to change, try to become better, try to become better parents, better friends, better colleagues, better humans, better Jews. That's what we're doing. We come back here every week. We'll see you next week, right? 10 o'clock. Bagels at 9:30. We're essentially demonstrating that free will does exist. Humanity has a chance. But why is free will so maligned? Why are people so hesitant to accept this? How often do you hear about someone coming from a disadvantaged background and that necessarily contributing to their actions? We hear this all the time.
Just put on the TV.
Exactly. And what we're being told is that someone's, let's say, crime was guaranteed and they had no other choice.
Or they're finding DNA for certain behaviors, and that's the cause of the behaviors that certain.
Yeah, but that alone, I think, might be true because your DNA is just your body's composition. You know what? Our body is designed to sin. That's also true. Yeah, but the point that someone has to sin, the point that someone's compelled to sin or compelled to act in a way that's unrefined or wrong or immoral or illegal. We're being told that all the time. It's a very common narrative, And I was just then we have the NBA finals now, and one of the great athletes, the great players. So he was talking about how the fact that his mom bore him when she was 18, and he grew up in the most the worst neighborhoods and whatever. But he put his life together, and he that's an example of free will. And he was maybe perhaps presented with, I guess, great opportunities. He was able to dunk in 6th grade or whatever. That probably helps. But still, the end result is someone who worked on their character, made something out of themselves despite being disadvantaged. Now, I'm not saying that someone who is disadvantaged in their background, clarify, that they're not necessarily at a disadvantage. Of course they are. But the fact that they have no choice in the matter, and there's no way for them to improve their lot, that is a rejection of free will.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, because one of the arguments is if you are brought up in a very hostile environment and there isn't anyone to interject anything positive or good, do you have free will? Because all you're seeing is negativity.
You have free will, you may not be using it.
Right.
Like we said, it's possible to not use it. And that's the importance of parenting, I would say.
Exactly.
Parenting, the best thing you can do to your child is prepare them for life. If you're not there for them.
You also have a village. We all.
Yeah, a community. That's right.
That no child, or none of us, are raised in isolation.
You're not adopted Hillary anymore.
I'm going to have to talk to him later. I'll take a while. No child. None of us are raised without interaction with parents, teachers, community. We're not animals.
Yeah,
We're wild.
and that's going to help us, to
Become socialized.
100%. But the idea of this, of someone being incapable, even on their own, is much harder. The free will mountain you got to climb is much harder if you don't have parents or a community, or a congregation or a societal kind of assistance in becoming proficient in free will. You'll have a harder time. But the fact that you're incapable, that's a narrative that we've heard, but it's not true. And now I want to make the argument that if someone actually, if someone's never experienced it, it's probably harder to accept. Like if you've never been faced with a dilemma, or just you've been in a corner and you finessed your way out of it. That if you never had that experience, then you don't know maybe on a tangible level that you have free will. I think perhaps additionally, if someone, the implications of free will are that someone's actions, they're responsible for it. It's a very disturbing thing. The fact that every single one of my actions is my responsibility, and I have to live with that.
Why is that disturbing?
I think it could be disturbing, and if someone, and it could be liberating to say, well, no, I'm not responsible for my actions, and then I don't have to think too much about it. The fact that everything that you do is something that you're going to have to live with and deal with the consequences, that is the natural implication of free will. And that could be very disturbing or painful or disheartening for people.
It's also your motivation for change.
It could be also your motivation as well. Free will choice, right? But for someone who doesn't want to be burdened with living a life that means something, it's much easier for them to say it's meaningless, and if I don't have to think about that, and don't burden me with that. I remember I had a student once who made the mistake of telling me that they're atheist. Now, the mistake is not that they're atheists; that they told me about it. Are you okay? Fine, let's talk about it. I'm fine. Let's debate the issue.
Well, what was his motivation to go into a Torah class?
Well, he wanted to meet the girls.
Going to class, what you believe, and if you're going to class for education, no matter what it is, whether you believe it or not, it's still, it's still stimulating as far
Right,
as...
but let me finish the epilogue of the story. So he told me. So he told me. Okay, fine. Let's talk about it. We'll sit and meet. This is a very important question. Maybe the most important question you'll face in your life. It's maybe you should spend some time. No, I don't want to talk about it. I want to think about it. Don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue. Right? That's what he tells me. Because to him, he'd rather not be burdened with these big thoughts.
How old was he?
He's like 25.
Obviously not married with children.
Obviously.
But some of these thoughts, many of these thoughts, there's no answer. At least we're not going to find out the
Well,
answer
let's discuss
the
it,
Malachim comes around,
No, but we have to do our due diligence. I think there are a lot of answers. But he is someone who's saying, I don't want to be hassled because I know I'll get into this argument with the rabbi. He'll trounce me. And then I'll be faced with a life that is a lot more heavy and weighted. And I don't want that.
Maybe that's a good thing, that at that point in his life, that's how he felt. Because eventually it's going to change. And because he's had this, he'll now appreciate when he gets to there.
Right, but
It's a path.
We don't
Maybe.
want to spend your whole life thinking about the existence of God.
no, but it just that God comes along with the existence of free will and then implications and then consequences and everything you got to do, you got to think about. Who wants to do that, right? It's painful. And the easier answer is, I don't believe, I'm out, check me out, and I don't want to talk about the story or drink.
It's just a process. This too shall
I hope so. He's a really nice young Israeli Jewish guy, and I actually met him. He moved to Miami, and I saw him actually last week when I was in Miami, 2 weeks ago. He's like, how you doing? He didn't want to follow up the conversation yet, so we'll see.
So he's still an atheist.
What does it mean to be an atheist? He has evidence that God doesn't exist. He's not an atheist.
That's what he said.
He claims, either he's an agnostic or he's not someone who's investigating the information. It's like, how could you make a stand? How can you make a stand on a very broad philosophical issue without ever having discussed it? So he's actually he's someone who should not really have a say in the matter, I would think. But to me, that behavior, that attitude is someone who says, I don't want to be burdened with that. That's what I wanted to bring out. So this is a very burdensome conversation, and I think that the easier way out is to say, no, we're pre-programmed, our actions are forced, and therefore we could just do what we want because we're forced to do it. Don't blame us.
That's fairly common. It's not uncommon with people 25
Yeah.
who rarely have a sick day in their life.
That's right. And I think life does help us at, kind of broaching these subjects.
One other thing. You talked about free will.
Yes.
Are we talking about conscience? Are they synonymous?
I wouldn't say that. I like to present it as just the conflict.
You've been
that-
avoiding the word.
Yeah, I know.
Why?
Because it's not necessarily something that you have to be conscious of. It's something that you have to every free will choice you think you make, you're aware of. I don't think so.
Isn't that God given us?
I think that would be probably ideal, because if you're aware that you're making a choice, you're probably going to make a more informed choice.
If we had free will, don't you think that conscience was also planted by God?
Of course.
So,
Of course.
do they are synonymous?
Yeah. No, I don't think they're synonymous. I think our consciousness is going to be heavily skewed towards our body, towards our Yetzirah. Because like we said, that what's chasing us and what's running away from us. If this...
Don't see it, Rabbi.
Okay, so if that's a definition that you're okay with, I'm fine. As long as...
I don't argue, I just don't.
Okay.
Are you talking about consciousness in a collective consciousness, or are you talking about an individual consciousness?
I'm talking about
Conscience.
individual consciousness, your consciousness.
Oh,
You're
conscious.
aware, you're not, are we talking about?
Something inside you that says that is wrong.
Good
Yeah,
and
so-
So
evil.
that's conscience,
Yes.
not
Conscience.
In the
Okay.
South, we call it conscience.
Okay, so that's...
It's
yeah.
conscience.
There
Okay,
is
I
a
didn't hear that
difference,
word.
is there not? One is just,
Conscience is
not
knowing
being
you did
asleep, I
something wrong, but
guess.
you can still do the wrong thing, feel guilty about it, but your actions.
But that's a
still not right.
learned behavior.
Yeah, I would agree that would be that's a reflection of the soul.
Okay.
You know, feeling good or feeling bad, or not wanting to do something bad because you know it's bad and you feel like there's implications. Yes. Sorry, I just didn't understand the word that you
It's kind of like your Jiminy
conscience.
Cricket. Is that what you're getting at?
Conscience is part of the soul.
Okay, so let's get into some of the important questions. This is a question I want to ponder. I don't want really an answer, because I think it's a very subtle question. So we have the body, we have the soul, we have the Yetzirah, we have the Yetzer Tov. Now, if we were to isolate the soul, if the soul was the only entity making the decisions, well, all the decisions would be soul-based. Is that right? And if we were to just isolate the body, and that was the only decision maker, well, then all the choices would be body-dominated. Seems fairly reasonable. Okay, so now we're human. So what's making the choice?
Well, you have these sociopaths, or people who presumably have no conscience, and they just do whatever the body tells them.
Okay, so that's
There are
fine.
those people
But
at one end of the spectrum.
true, I'm fine with that. But let's say we are making choices. Means this is creating a third entity. I want to say a third entity, but a third reality, which is not a body and not a soul, but a man, a human, which is a fusion of the two, but it's another entity. It's not the body, not the soul. It's something else. It means man is more than just the sum of body plus soul. It's something else, and that's what makes the decision. Which is a mind-blowing idea. What is that, and where do we find it, and what's this existence at the point of fusion of body and soul that has decision-making power? A point to ponder. Point number 2. Let's have some questions.
Synthesis of the two.
Huh?
Synthesis of
Yes,
the two.
yes. But it creates a new reality called man. Yes. So let's start with some questions. Question number 1: Jacob and Esau. So they are they're twins, and if you look at the description of the gestation of Jacob and Esau, it says that the kids, or they were battling in utero, and Rebecca, the mom, went to talk to someone, and he told them, "Oh, you have twins, and one of them is going to be, they'll be constantly fighting with each other, and the younger one will dominate the older one." Fine. Now, Rashi, the commentator, once again, he opens up this battle scene that they were struggling, and he tells us is that what happened is that every time the mother would pass a house of idolatry, Esau would try to struggle to get out. And every time they would pass a house of Torah study, Jacob would try to get out. And that caused so much confusion for her, and that's where she went. Now, what does this mean? In utero, Jacob is trying to, he's yearning to study Torah, to do the good, and Esau is trying to do idolatry, trying to reject God. And lo and behold, they're born, and then Esau goes off to be the murderer, and Jacob is the one who's studying in the house, in the tent. This seems to imply that even before they're born, and clearly before that they even have a Yetzirah, before they even have the capability of choice, they already choosing. How is that jive with free will? That's a good question, no? It seems like,
An example of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hara.
but the Yetzer Hara, we're told the Yetzer Hara doesn't exist in utero. We know that for sure. Huh?
Neither does that story. It's an analogy.
It's an analogy, but what's the... Okay, so you're saying maybe it's some sort of metaphor, but it says, and the verse says that she had this struggle, and she felt like every time she passed, she felt like it seems like she only thought that she had one child, and she was disturbed by the fact that the child had such polar desires. But either way, now we know that there's two children. Okay, but how is it fair that someone is, or how does it work with free will when the one child seems to want good even before they're making this choice in the matter?
Are there anti-Islam overtones to that?
Anti-Islam.
Yeah, because it wasn't Esau the father of Islam.
No, Esau's the father of Edom. Ishmael is the father of.
But Ishmael was Esau's offspring, right?
No, Ishmael is Esau's uncle,
Okay.
Abraham had Ishmael, then had.
half uncle.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Yes.
It means, but to answer your question, does that have something to do with, you mentioned how everyone has different proclivities to do things, different challenges, and you are sort of born with that?
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like Jacob had any proclivities, negative proclivities, and we don't.
Did have negative proclivities.
Well, we assume he did, but it seems like even before. Let me give you another example of this problem. We find in the book of Yoma. Yoma is the book that talks about one of the 63 books of the Mishnah talks about what happens in Yom Kippur, right? So Yom Kippur, we know, is day of, you're supposed to fast in Yom Kippur, not anything the entire day. And we find this question that it arises when a woman is pregnant, and she has a certain craving. I mean, she got to fast in Yom Kippur. Well, of course, if there's any danger or anything like that, she doesn't fast. But she's fasting and she's fine, and then suddenly she gets this massive craving. She wants the pickles and ice cream, right? And what do? We're worried every time a woman's pregnant. She has a certain craving. We know it's dangerous to withhold that from her. So what do? And it's as if like the baby is kind of saying, "Give me ice cream." He's kind of playing with the woman's mind. And what do? It's Yom Kippur. She can't eat, but she really needs to eat. So the Talmud says that what they used to do was when they would go and they would whisper into the woman's ear that today's Yom Kippur. And the hope was that the baby, so to speak, would be calmed by that, would be mollified. Fine. And the Talmud reads two stories. It says there was one time that there was this woman on Yom Kippur, she was pregnant, and she had this craving for a certain food, and they went and they whispered into her ears Yom Kippur, and the baby calmed down. And the rabbis was all excited, and they quoted the verse on the baby that we know that this kid is going to be a righteous kid. And it turns out that baby was one of the great rabbis. Fantastic. And then additionally it happened with another kid, and same thing happened, and they whispered to the mother in the ear, and the kid did not relax, and she had to break her fast in Yom Kippur. The rabbi said, "Oh, Zur Rishon Mirachem." They quoted another verse that says, "Oh, the kid's going to be a wicked kid," and he turned out to be this famous thug. That's it.
He became what?
A famous. I said, yeah. He was a famous guy who would rob people, whatever. They quoted his name. This is the book of Yoma. If you want to read it, it's in 82b and 83a.
Yes, but on the other hand, that kid was set up. From the moment of his birth, people were telling him, you're going to be miserable.
Exactly, that's what I was
So the
thinking
kid
too.
became miserable.
Not fair.
Program.
Yes.
It's kind of like when you tell a kid they are, that's what they'll end up being.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good theory. Or maybe this was a kid that was designated, designed, and programmed to be righteous, and the other was programmed to be, and that doesn't seem to jive well with free will.
Or maybe this happened 2,000 times, and in these two situations it turned out that way. They said, "Okay, see."
So maybe, you're trying to answer the question, but I think the question is maybe you're right. But we don't know. It means you're hypothetically saying, well, maybe you're spitballing ideas, but maybe not. We don't know about that.
How does this, because this seems like kind of what we're getting into about, not jiving with free will or whatever, but hormonal things or chemical things, like if someone is mentally ill, severely mentally ill, and they do evil, can it be said that they have free will? I mean,
No, I would argue not. No, I would argue not. They're not capable of choice. I think that's a fair argument.
Okay, so analogizing it to what we were just talking about, the pregnant woman, okay? If the hormones are doing something, she doesn't have free will either, does she? If the hormones are such to where...
It seems like from this Talmud, we're not talking about the woman, we're talking about the child. Which is bizarre. Child's not making any decisions now.
The woman's craving?
How can the child...
Pickles and whatever? Or...
Well, the woman's craving, but it's a result of the baby, right?
Well, I understand, but I mean, it's also her whole... It's not just the baby, it's her too, isn't it?
Maybe that's an interesting point. That maybe she maybe
So
something.
hormones are affecting
So maybe
her.
the argument would be, well, the mom didn't get mollified, and she was the mom of this kid, and that he had poor parenting, and maybe that these are all. I think these are all nice ideas. No, I'm not rejecting them at all. But I want to introduce maybe an alternative idea, and that is kind of the point of contention. So the body and the soul, they have conflict. What's the conflict? So let's say someone grew up in that disadvantaged neighborhood, right? To them, they're not thinking about trying to save humanity. It's not really what their soul really is arguing. I would perhaps even say that maybe if someone is going to be a criminal, right? Let's assume someone is a criminal. Do they not have free will? Maybe the point of contention where their body and soul meet is if you're going to do a crime, are you also going to shoot the guy, or are you going to try to get away and not shoot the guy? Means the good is trying to do good, but there's a limitation in where you could be at the in the spectrum of good versus evil. And you're perhaps your point of contention is different than everyone else's. Everyone, wherever they're holding, wherever their body and soul meet, kind of like you think of it like a battlefront. All of us, I would argue, are not at the point in our lives where if someone cuts us off or someone says something not nice to us, we're going to pull a weapon on them. Right? I would make that assumption. Why? Because that's not a free will choice for us. Because we're not at the point where we even consider doing something like that. There are other people we know that would be at that point. But for us, that is like a guaranteed good. Just like you'll always do that good, because that's your free will choice is more advanced than that. For us, it would be maybe to do something extra nice to our spouse versus maybe, take out the garbage. It's a schlep, it's smelly, or leave it to the wife to do. It's good to take it out and do something good for someone else, but our body says, I'm tired, we'll do it tomorrow, or let her take care of it. That's maybe that's maybe a more advanced choice that we would have. But the battlefront kind of moves as per our choices. Why is that? So let's go back to the early Mishnah. I'll recap it. I think I didn't explain it so well here. We talk about chase a good mitzvah, a minor mitzvah, eat like a major mitzvah, and run away from sin. Right? Why? One mitzvah drags another mitzvah, and the reward of a mitzvah is another mitzvah. What does this mean? So we're at a certain point in the spectrum of good and evil where our body and our soul meet. That's kind of the point of contention, the point of conflict. When someone overcomes their body, overcomes a temptation, does what's good even though it's hard, it becomes easier to do that again. We talk about waking up in the morning, early in the morning. That's what's good. Or you could snooze and wake up late. That's what your body wants. Just another half hour of sleep. That's what your body wants. Your soul wants to get up. You do it a few times, that becomes easy. It becomes a habit. Why? Because you push the frontier of conflict to a higher level, so to speak. And whatever you captured, so to speak, is guaranteed. That's not negotiable anymore. It's not even a challenge for you. The challenge is not something else. Does that make sense at all what I'm saying?
You're constantly being challenged to greater and greater level.
Hopefully. Or it's the opposite. If your body overcomes, if you sin, so to speak, then that sin becomes even harder to overcome the next time. And then that becomes almost guaranteed territory of your body, and the frontier regresses. You're losing your good side is losing territory. So I would say perhaps that everyone essentially has free will. The question is, at what point of the totem pole are you on? And the hope is that even though you may start off at a lower rung, that doesn't mean that your free will choices are not great achievements. So ironically, someone could commit a crime, and that could be what their soul wants. Because the soul wants them to commit maybe a less heinous crime than what their body would want them to do. And to them, that's a minor victory for the soul. Which it's ironic, obviously, but and that would progress them a little bit closer towards the good side and further away from the absolute. So I would maybe argue that perhaps Esau indeed was disadvantaged. He had a propensity towards sin. But does that mean that his potential for greatness was any less than that of Jacob on their own individual scale? No. That's, for example, Maimonides. Maimonides has an entire chapter dedicated to free will. And he is the first to really deal with the question. Well, not the first, but he has a response to the famous question that we're all thinking about. How does God, the interrelationship of God's foreknowledge, destiny, so to speak, versus our capacity for choice. He addresses that in this fifth chapter of the book of the laws of repentance, which is the book of Mada, which is the first of the 14 books of the Mishnah Torah. But he says in the beginning, he talks about free will, he says every man, every single human, be Jewish, do not be Jewish, can be as great as Moses, the greatest man that ever lived. Now we know that really every man can't really be like Moses, because we can't be prophets. Right? Where Judaism is a non-profit organization nowadays. We can't be prophets. We cannot be as great as Moses. How can we be like Moses? Maimonides himself writes we can't be like Moses in prophecy. How is it possible that every single human could be as great as Moses?
Can be, not will be, right?
Can. Via.
Because we all have the same divine spark. God breathes.
But how can we be as great as Moses? How could we be as great as Moses? We have a soul. Moses is a soul. So what?
By our soul prevailing more than the body to the degree that Moses is doing.
Free will.
Moses wasn't perfect.
So,
Right. He was.
True.
Moses sinned.
True.
Which is why he didn't get into.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. But I think there's a qualitative and quantitative structure to this. Moses was greater than any man that ever lived. We'll never reach that. But he maximized his free will choices, and he succeeded one after another. The sum total of that was a greatness that we can't even imagine. Our free will choices are much lower. We start at a much lower run, much smaller capacity for greatness. However, us too, like if we were to maximize our free will opportunities, we could potentially maximize our potential. Right? We all have a finite potential. Moses' finite potential was much greater than ours, but we too have a finite potential. And if we were to maximize that, we're as great as Moses because we accomplish as much as we can, just like Moses accomplished as much as he could have. But that's a reflection of where we are at the starting point. If at the starting point, if someone could potentially accomplish 20 notches of greatness in their lives, and we start at point minus 175, the maximum for us, Moses' level for us, is minus 155. And that's for us, we're as great as Moses. But you look at the guy's a sinner all day and all night. But he's as great as Moses. Because maybe for them at their point of contention where the free will conflict exists, where the body and soul meet, was at a point that was so deeply in the heartland of sin that to them greatness means to sin, to sin less. And Moses started off at maybe 10,000, and he reached 10,020, which is maybe the greatest number total sum that anyone has ever had. We do find stories about baby Moses that are astonishing. He was a prophet, like in utero, was like insane. But he maximized his potential as well. So yes, Moses is greater than us because Moses does maximize his potential.
And the idea, I think, is that we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to be quote unquote Moses, and we're certainly not ever going to be God.
That's
but
true.
By striving for perfection, you get closer to it, even though you'll never get there. But by having the targets.
But I think more than that, our greatness is on an individualized scale. Yeah. Where we came from and where we could get is, those are fixed realities. None of us are going to reach levels of Moses. However, the way we're actually measured is individually, is on a relative scale, like you mentioned. Where you were at the starting point and what you did with whatever cards you were dealt with. So Esau was dealt with poor cards, but he could have become as great as Moses as well. Jacob got the pocket aces, right? He was dealt fantastic cards, and he did greatness with that. But doesn't mean that Esau could not have achieved the same level of greatness on his relative scale that his brother did, or that Moses did, or that any one of us can do.
So we're not graded on a bell curve, which works to my advantage.
Yeah, yeah. But obviously, on an absolute scale, on an absolute level, none of us could reach Moses. Of course not. Moses has a conversation with God. That's beyond. We can't even think about that. That's insane for us.
Wouldn't you say that environmental factors influence, since they both came from the same parents or raised the same way? Wouldn't they both have been started off at the same point?
Yes, but you, as parents, any parent that has two children knows that even though, the kids grow up in the same family and they have the same parentage, but still they're different.
Their inclinations are different.
Yeah, so maybe similar. My two sons. So I have three sons, but and a daughter. But my oldest son, we saw from day one. We saw that he had a certain tendency towards sharing, towards giving to other people. Like he would suffer when other people would suffer. Like he had a certain quality of empathy and kindness that was almost natural. And his younger brother, just from day one, didn't have that necessarily. Much more territorial.
Right. If you're guiding the second child in the right direction to be like the brother.
Yes. So we have.
You would be at the same.
Yeah, but the second child has qualities that the first child does not have.
Exactly. We all have ups and downs, but if you're raised in the
yes,
same
so the
social
hope would be that the same environment.
Both boys would end up.
Yes.
At a good place. Is what I'm saying.
That's right. So the question is, well, how is that possible that Jacob and Esau were raised?
Utero would be.
So yes, maybe they started off differently, but they also ended in vastly different places.
Right.
But everything goes towards contributing to who we are, like our just reality and our circumstances, our parents, our society, our school, our.
Our free will.
But also we do play a part with our free will as well. So that's that. And now for the feature presentation. The question that I think is inevitable when you have this conversation, and it's a very good question. It's a very troubling question, and it's something that invariably we're going to discuss, and that is the question of the two presuppositions that we have that don't seem to be possible to coexist. And that is the idea of God knowing everything, even before it happens. Thus, God knows if I will be righteous or I'll be wicked, if I'll choose good or choose bad, already before I choose it. Yet I have the free will to choose it, and I can essentially choose either way. The way Maimonides phrases this, perhaps you will ask, but the Almighty knows everything that will happen before it even happens. The Almighty knows if this person will be righteous or wicked. And if the Almighty knows that person will be righteous, it's impossible for them to be wicked. And if the Almighty knows that he'll be righteous, but it's possible for him to be wicked, then the Almighty doesn't know really. So this is the question. We have this understanding of God knowing everything before it even happens. So God knows all choices that we'll do before it even happens. Thus, if I'm presented with a free will choice, it's free will, right? I can choose whichever. It's possible, potentially, for me to choose either way. Yet, God exists at a later point in time where God already knows what happened. Thus, it's already set in stone what am I going to choose. So if it's set in stone what I'm going to choose, well, I don't really have free will. It's pre-programmed. It's destiny. It's already been determined, predetermined. It's determinism. And if I can choose, well, then God doesn't know. So either way, this is a catch-22. These seem to be irreconcilable. These two realities, and we essentially believe both of them to be true.
Well, could it be that, we can choose, and God knows what we're going to choose?
Okay.
So that's it.
No,
Is that it?
there's no time or space in the God world. And you could, at any point in that point of no time, you could choose a good and you could choose an evil. It's like opening two different doors, and they could be happening simultaneously.
Yeah, I think I agree with you.
Well,
Well, I want to appreciate the question first. It's such a good question, and in fact, there is one Jewish response, which to me is, I won't say insane, but to me it's just remarkable that there is one Jewish attitude towards this question that says that God's knowledge is not complete, and God knows, but God knows in kind of a fuzzy, murky way. And thus we have the choice to choose either way.
Is that well, how did Maimonides explain it?
That's not how Maimonides explained it.
All right, how did he explain
Okay, so I actually printed it out over here. When I printed it out, but I typed it out over here and I want to just give a direct translation because he says things and he seems to be answering the question, but he doesn't answer the question. But maybe does he or does he not? He says as follows: you should know that the answer to this question is broader than the entire world and more vast than the ocean. And there's many important principles that you have to know and high mountains you have to climb in order to understand it. So he's telling you this is a very good question. I think it's important for us to not realize, not to try to do away with the question as a simple question. It's a very good question.
Is this another way of him saying that there is no answer to it?
No, well, let's see what he says. Let's move on here. Okay. But you need to know and understand the thing I'm going to tell you, which, by the way, when Maimonides gives you that preamble, you might want to turn on your mind. Okay. We already established, and he quotes we established earlier, that the Almighty does not have any external knowledge. The knowledge is not external to him, just like man. Right? Man and man's knowledge, man's understanding, man's conceptions are distinct, are different. How do we know that man and their understanding is different? Let's just zoom out here. How do we know that you and your knowledge are not the same thing? We know that because you, at one point in time, did not have that knowledge. For example, Mike and Ike's, the candy. Everyone here familiar with that candy, Mike and Ike's? You kids love those.
They're liquids, aren't they?
They're like these little chewy candies. Hot tamales, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
So I read once that the center, the gooey part in the center, that's unflavored. Just the outside is flavored. Okay? You guys know that, right? Everyone knows that?
Take your word for it.
Did you know it today? Earlier before you walked in here?
No.
Now you know it. So knowledge is something that we acquire in a time, in a time lapse. time changes, you encounter external knowledge, and now you have that knowledge. But that knowledge is not essential to who you are. Right? Okay, that makes a lot of sense. God doesn't have that same model. God and his knowledge is one. Okay. Now that idea, so continues the Maimonides. Him and his knowledge is one, and for us to really understand that, it's a little bit hard. We cannot completely understand that idea. And just like we don't have the capacity to understand the reality of God, as it says, he quotes a verse. So too, we can't really understand the reality of God's knowledge. Point number 2 that he's establishing is that we have other problems with the existence of God. How so? We cannot imagine it not existing in time and space. That's not something that we are capable of really understanding. How can something exist outside of space? Try to define that for me. Do you have any definition for that? We don't have a definition for that. How could God exist before the Big Bang, where there's no time and space? Well, how did God even today exist without time and space? How could you exist simultaneously today, yesterday, the day before, 1900? Is that possible for us to understand? Anyone? Does that make sense to anyone? Clearly? Just like we don't understand how God exists, we don't understand how God's knowledge works. Point number 2. What he's telling us also, by the way, that there's another question that we could have asked. And that is that if God does exist, how do we exist? How do we exist if God exists? Means he's broadening the subject. He's essentially telling us that, okay, we exist. We're not God. I'm not God. None of you guys are God. Right? So somebody exists outside of God. Well, how does that work? How is that not a limitation of God's total dominion over everything? He's telling us is that this conflict is more than just in a decision-making capacity, but in an existential reality capacity. The fact that we exist and we're not God flies in the face of God being in total dominion over everything. Well, we're not God. No? So how do we exist? How is something that's not God?
God created us. That's how we
Okay,
exist,
so but that's a certain limitation of God, right? What you say? Now there's something that's not God.
We're created out of the energy that is God.
True, but we're not God. Everyone agree to that point? So there's something that's not God, so there's a limitation in God. Isn't that right?
You're saying God could, if God was all powerful, he could make other gods.
No, I didn't say that. No, but what I'm saying is that the reality of our existence seems to conflict with our definition of God. Because our definition of God is not lacking anything. However, us not being God is a lack in God, won't you say?
No.
Really? Because if it's something that's not God, well, isn't that a lack? Isn't that a limitation?
I go back to my point
So,
just a moment
yes.
ago. So the limitation would be removed if God could create other gods in his image.
So you're saying if God desires that, it's not a limitation?
No, if God could do it. So we can all desire things. We can't necessarily do them. Although God may have infinite power. But so God could make other gods like himself if he wanted to, I guess. Or are we getting off the point? I'm not...
Well, I'm just highlighting here a point that it seems like Maimonides is bringing out, is that for us to really understand God essentially, we can't really do it because we're working in a different set of rules than what we have.
It's like trying to understand infinity.
That's right.
It's like trying to explain.
That's just another way of saying that I can't answer it.
No. That's the. I think that's a surface level understanding of what he's saying. He's saying, "Oh, it's beyond our." But I think he's explaining to us why we can't understand it.
It's the same thing
And he
that God
quotes-
said to Job, isn't it? Basically.
Well, Job kind of asked the same question. I actually skipped
Well,
that
that's my
part.
point.
Job asked the same question.
And I think God answered it the same way Maimonides is answering it, basically. Because didn't God tell Job, basically, if you think you're so smart, where were you when I created the world and established the dimensions of, whatever it was?
Yeah.
It's a similar type
Yeah, and because the same dialogue existed between God and Job. But continue, the last line here. Because we don't understand exactly how God knows things, we have no capacity to understand how God allows people to have free will. But we know for sure, without doubt, that the actions of man are in the hands of man, and the Almighty does not pull him or decree upon him to do any which way. And he says this is not acceptance on faith. It's not because of we're faith, rather we have evidence towards it. I think what he's saying is like this. I think the fact that we have free will is independently demonstrable. That's something we even discussed about the implications of the other side. If you believe that anyone is liable for anything that they do, you believe in free will, and we all feel that innately. And we have the evidence for God being in total, in a totally different sphere where time doesn't exist. Thus, God exists beyond the scope of time. How they're compatible, well, that we can only really answer if we're able to understand God's perspective. How is it possible that God knows something and doesn't, and still allows that? But we are asking a question where we're creating a conflict between two different realities, two different models. Like, we're asking a question from our perspective and contrasting that with God's perspective.
Okay. I think that my hypothesis, not that there's anything brilliant about it, but it doesn't conflict what I said a couple of minutes ago, that maybe God, we have free will, but maybe God knows what we're going to do. He knows what we're going to do. We have free will, but God knows what we're going to choose.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't conflict, I don't think, with what Maimonides says.
That's essentially what he's saying, but he's telling us is that the fact
I may be wrong.
The linchpin of the problem here is the fact that God's knowledge is not similar to our knowledge. That's what he's saying.
God's knowledge.
Right. I think because God's knowledge is existing outside of time. So the fact that we are bound to the constraints of time and God is not, it's thus God exists post facto. It's like saying, hey, we exist now, right? So we know the decisions we made yesterday, right? Does that necessarily mean that our actions yesterday were bound because we know that now that they did happen? I mean, in 1981, some guy tried to shoot Reagan. We know that for sure. John Hinckley, right? He tried to kill him, right? We know that for sure. That's undeniable. Well, he didn't have free choice. For sure happened, right? Well, no, he had free choice at that time. We're existing post facto, therefore, right now, but at the time he had choice. If God is existing outside of the time constraints, and we are in the time constraints, right? We could have free will, even though God knows what the choice is going to be. But like I said, it's hard to really accept that because we're not used to thinking outside of the model that we exist in, and therefore, if God exists within time, there is no answer to the question. But I think he's hinting to the fact that it's not just limited to our choice, but our existence at large, in contrast with God's existence, is the same problem. Because we have parallel existences that are not playing by the same rules. I think that another way to ask this, like if you were to ask a scientist, someone who does not believe, not getting any religion or any theology involved, what happened 5 minutes before the Big Bang? Just 5 minutes. What's the answer to the question? Well, that's not a question you can ask, because you're bringing two worlds together and you're contrasting them when they don't have the same rules. So what existed before that was something that there was no time. And if there's no time, you can't ask what was like 5 minutes before that.
Well,
but what do you mean? Why not? Just work the clock back. What was like 5 minutes before that? There was no clock then.
Is there another implication that you're getting at by posing that hypothetical about asking the science what happened?
Yeah, my question is
your
No, that's not my point. My only point is that the question is only valid if the laws are consistent in both scenarios. However, if one world pre-Big Bang does not have time, you cannot ask the question that we have today. What was like? Well, 5 minutes ago we were talking about free will, or an hour, 2 hours ago I was driving my car. We could ask that if somebody asked me, "What were you doing 2 hours ago?" I said, "I was driving my car," right? But because the scenario has the element of time in it, you cannot ask what was like 5 minutes before the Big Bang because there was no such thing as time before that. So I think that this question is the conflict is contrasting two realities that aren't playing by the same rules, and therefore we can't really answer the question.
That doesn't mean it's unfair.
But we have to.
ask the question.
We did ask the question. We discussed it. I didn't say it's unfair to ask the question, but the answer lies in the fact that these two realities are independently verifiable. Thus, we know it's true. How they're compatible is an open question. But we know that we can't answer them because they're not playing by the same rules. You don't like it still. We're answering the question by saying we can't answer the question, but we're not shying away. We're explaining what. Either way, yes. I know we went overtime, and I apologize for going overtime. But I think that to me, this is a better answer than saying God's knowledge is incomplete. Because then what you're saying is God is playing by the same rules, and God does exist within time, and God's knowledge is not complete, which to me is a much greater question, and the implications are much greater. Either way, that's that. So I think we kind of got a nice introduction to the discussions.
Don't they usually say that God's knowledge is infinite as opposed to incomplete? I think I've heard that.
Yeah, of course.
But you just
Right, I said there is an opinion that does say that. So that, to me, that's a very troubling opinion.
It says that there's an opinion that says God's knowledge
That's
is incomplete.
that's right to me, which is
But
very
that's-
troubling.
That's not necessarily the gospel. That's just somebody.
It's one opinion, and it's a Jewish opinion, but it's a very troubling one.
So
Okay.
next class is what are we working towards? Just so you know, a detailed examination of the Messianic